It's been said before by both me and other people, but one of the most notable things about Fire Emblem is that not all the games take place in the same world or use the same characters every time. Yeah, there might be some games that have multiple games in it, like the Epilogue and Telia series, but then there's games like Sacred Stones that are just a one-off. This trend actually got started with Fire Emblem Gaiden, but for some reason after that game, Nintendo decided to take the setting back to Marth's game and use them again for Fire Emblem 3. Despite going back and continuing Marth's story, the decision was made to continue onward with a new setting and a new group of protagonists for the next Fire Emblem game. And while I'm thinking about it, the English patch that I used for this game was made long before Nintendo decided to finally give us an official English names for any of these characters, so if I call someone a name that you're unfamiliar with, or if I pronounce something a little weird, sorry. But also deal with it. Now let me go ahead and say that I'm going to try and avoid spoilers the best I can with this review, all except for one, but I'll give you a warning before that happens. That being said, I'm not perfect, so proceed with caution. Anyway, this is a tale of country, war, love, and incest. This is Fire Emblem Genealogy: The Holy War. Fire Emblem Genealogy: The Holy War is the fourth Fire Emblem game of the series and the second on the Super Famicom system. This time the story takes place on the continent of Jugdral and starts off following yet another blue-haired protagonist, Sigurd. The plot is rather simple. Prince Kurth of the Kingdom of Grandville decides to invade and subdue the Kingdom of Isaac in response to an invasion of Darna by barbarians of Rivo, and then Lord Sigurd of Chalfie holds down the fort at home while his dad's off fighting in the war, and then Gandalf of Verdane invades Granville to keep Princess Adine forced and marry him, and kills all his other knights except this green-haired guy, and then Sigurd goes to save her, but his friends Azel and Lex from Belthor and Dozel join up and help, and Arvis shows up and gives Sigurd a sword, and Sigurd responds to the warning. So I know that Fire Emblem games have always dealt with politics and the squabbles of aristocracy to some degree, but Genealogy really amped up that angle. Throughout the story, you're constantly hearing about other kingdoms and their spats, and everybody's given some sort of title, and there seems to be a lot of emphasis on nations and behind-the-scenes politics. There's still plenty of war to go around, but the game doesn't put as much emphasis on stopping a doomsday cult until the very end. There's still that, of course, but some of the villains actually have more realistic motivations, like wanting to create a world of stability under their control rather than just being a megalomaniac hungry for power. And all of this stems from how the creator of this series and writer of this game, Shozu Kaga, decided they wanted to write less of a mythological epic and more of a large-scale historical drama this time. While the original Fire Emblem games drew more from classic mythology, Genealogy took more inspiration from Norse and Celtic mythology. It also drew heavily from the theme that humanity often repeats stupid mistakes because they don't give a damn about learning their history. Kaga wanted the game to really show off how the conflict affected the world of Jugdral, not just the characters. And when you see how the game was designed, I'd say he succeeded in that. But the basic overall plot for the first half of the game is this. Sigurd is a knight of a kingdom that sets out to save a kidnapped princess, and everything kind of just snowballs from there. The gameplay of Genealogy follows most classic Fire Emblem tropes. Everything's turn-based, where you move your units, and then sit back and watch the enemy completely screw you over because you forgot to move that one cleric out of the way. Units level up through experience by winning battles, and if someone dies, they're gone forever, save for bringing them back with that one-time Valkyrie staff. That being said, there's a lot of elements of Genealogy that made it feel a lot more unique. For starters, there's the scope of the game. Genealogy only has about 12 chapters in its main story, which is including the prologue and the epilogue. And while that number may seem small for a Fire Emblem game, considering that most of them clock out at over 20 or more chapters, don't be deceived, because every single map in Genealogy is massive. The levels in Genealogy are huge, so big that it's not uncommon for each one to take hours to get through. One chapter in Genealogy is the equivalent to 3 or 4 in any other Fire Emblem game. Each chapter has multiple castles on it that you have to use Sigurd to capture. Once you've captured all of them, the level's over and you can move on to the next one. The catch here is that you also have to make sure to defend those castles that you're capturing, because if you don't and the enemy takes them, they'll destroy them, which will destroy any shops that are inside and cut you off from valuable resources. And if they destroy your home castle, aka the one you started the chapter from, it's game over. Still a little annoying that the enemy's response isn't just to take the castle back though. I mean, come on man, that's prime real estate. This isn't freaking Minecraft, I can't build another one of those things like they split. The good news is that Genealogy has a save function so that if you need to do things like sleep, eat, or remind your family members that you're still alive, you could do that. But this still creates the problem that if you don't save regularly, you could lose hours of progress. And if you saved at a point after you made an irrevocable mistake, you're gonna have to start the entire chapter over. What this boils down to is that a lot of the strategy in Genealogy revolves around holding down castles or preparing for enemy reinforcements that'll try to sweep in and attack your forts when you're not looking. And with how big the maps are, you can't just send off your whole army to attack the enemy. You have to plan around the fact that someone needs to be at home to hold down the fort. But the good news is that it's usually pretty easy to predict when enemy reinforcements are going to show up, so it's easy to prepare. While the maps are enormous, you don't have access to all of them at the start of the chapter. More and more of the map will open up as you capture objectives, but until then several parts are just walled off by a soldier doing his best Snorlax impression. And here you are without a Pokeflute. However, once you do capture a castle, the gates of hell open up, enemies plunge forward and attack you from somewhere else. It's probably a pretty good idea to make use of that save function I mentioned. One of the other most standout gameplay mechanics in Genealogy is the lovers mechanic. Fire Emblem nowadays tends to get a pretty bad rap for how much emphasis people like to put on the shipping mechanics. If you're one of the people that don't like that, that's totally fine, but just remember that Awakening Fates did not start this. Genealogy did it first. One of the things in Genealogy allows players to do is pair up men and women in your army by having them stand next to each other and build affection. It was essentially the prototype for the later well-known support mechanic. If two characters spend enough time idly standing beside each other and build up enough love points, they'll become lovers and gain several benefits. Some very good benefits, if you know what I mean.
I've been really trying, baby, trying to hold back this feeling for so long.
You know, like being able to open a shared checking account. Having two characters become lovers also unlocks additional unique dialogue between them and will sometimes involve one character giving the other a powerful weapon as a gift. Overall, it's nothing but beneficial, especially in the second half of the game. See, Genealogy not only flagshipped the shipping in Fire Emblem, but also the children mechanic. About halfway through Genealogy, the story shifts from following Sigurd to following his son Seliph almost 2 decades later. Seliph has his own adventure and quest to complete, and his own companions that'll help him do that. And most of these companions are determined by who you made shack up in the first generation. Every first-gen female character in Genealogy has the potential to have 2 children, a boy and a girl, that will accompany Seliph on his journey during the second generation. However, they only have these kids if they got married to someone during the first generation. The kids inherit the equipment and the skills of their parents, so how strong they end up being is pretty much determined by who their parents are. If you don't marry off the women in the first gen, you'll still get some units to back up Seliph, but they won't be nearly as strong as the children units could have been. This means that shipping plays a big part into how hard the second half of the game is. All this talk about skills makes me remember some idiot YouTuber said that skills originated in Path of Radiance. Who was that again? Path of Radiance introduced the skill system in Fire Emblem, or rather they expanded on it and made it the staple that it is today. Man, what a maroon. Turns out the character skills have been around for a while and were a lot more important in Genealogy. For example, characters can't attack enemies twice unless they have a skill called Pursuit, something that later games let anyone do provided they're fast enough. Go figure. Something important to remember about games like Genealogy is that they're old. And they did some incredible things in their time, but when looked at it with a modern perspective, there's some things that were not conveyed very well. In Genealogy's case, that's a lot of things, because they don't really tell you how to do anything. I'll go ahead and clarify that I enjoyed Genealogy quite a bit, but there's still things about it that I can't overlook. One of the glaring issues is the lack of instruction on how to really do anything. It's funny because this is actually a recurring problem in all the Japanese Fire Emblem games, so get used to me saying that at least once a video to some capacity. Let's just start with the lovers and second generation mechanic. For its time, this aspect of the game must have been phenomenal. Just imagine that you were a kid or a teenager playing this game in the 90s and you found out that there was an entire other timeline of characters to play as. You were no longer playing a video game, you were playing an epic that spanned decades. I'm not even exaggerating, the timeline of this game takes years. Sometimes an entire year will pass between one chapter to the next. They actually fit an entire other game in the series in between 2 of the chapters. Thracia 7076, the 5th game in the Fire Emblem franchise, takes place between chapters 6 and 7 of Genealogy. An entire game. However, despite what a cool concept this is, the problem lies with making it work effectively, which Genealogy kinda skirts around. You see, there's never any kind of tutorial on how to make the lovers mechanic work. Seliph's one of the only children characters that's guaranteed in the second generation, since Sigurd and his wife Deirdre hook up as part of the plot. The only kind of hints that there's even a second generation of characters is the lover slot on the menu screen, some cryptic hint from a villager about skills being passed down from parents to their children, and the fact that the game is called Genealogy of the Holy War. And you might think that these hints are enough to suggest that a second generation's coming, but that is ignoring the fact that this type of mechanic in the game was pretty much unheard of for its time, so I'm willing to say, no, you would not have seen it coming. There's also the fact that the game doesn't tell you how to make people fall in love, so you're in danger to fall in love automatically, which can mislead the player thinking the other character will fall in love based on story events. Not to mention it sets a rather bad Disney precedent. These are very impressionable children that are playing your game about war, Nintendo. Not to mention there's also Ethlyn, Sigurd's sister, who's married to another character named Quan. Things like these might mislead the player to think that everybody has a canon love interest, when in truth, you have to be one playing Cupid or else you'll end up with a bunch of crappy units during the second generation. There's even character introduced in the first chapter who says he has a crush on another character, which might make you think that's going somewhere with that. Or how half your army seems to have the hots for Edine. They can all marry her, it's true, but only if you make them stand next to each other for at least 50 turns. And look, you might think that, oh, this must have been covered in an instruction booklet, or, oh, this must have been covered like on the back of the box, or something like that. But what if you had borrowed this game from a friend? What if you had bought it used? What if you were playing it on an emulator because you didn't speak Japanese? Later games they use the support mechanic circumvented this by having conversations that would lead up to the hookup. If you didn't want two characters to end up together, you just didn't have them talk to each other. It was that simple. They might have some unresolved sexual tension, but at least they'd keep it in their pants. Damn it, Roy, I said no! You're marrying Lena and that's final. Besides, this one's stats suck anyway. In Genealogy, there's no stopping of that if you're not careful. On a blind playthrough, assuming you're either lucky or unlucky, you might have two characters fall in love by accident. Imagine if that's how it worked in real life, if whoever you were stuck behind at checkout ended up being your soulmate. Well, depending on who you get, you might not mind. But from their point of view, it might not be that good of a deal. Another major issue that Genealogy has is the item system, and I'm inclined to believe that this is just a sign of technology at the times, but it still doesn't make it much better. Characters can't trade items in this game, which is pretty annoying in a strategy game where resource management is a huge part of gameplay. This means that if a character kills a boss that was holding a ring that will boost an element that they don't use, like say magic for a knight, then them holding that ring is absolutely useless. The only way to get that item to a character that can make use of it is to sell it at a castle's pawn shop and then have the appropriate unit buy it back. The issue here is that the pawn shop prices are twice the price of what you sold it for, so buying it back can be really difficult. There is some good news to all this though. Unlike later Fire Emblem games, you don't lose weapons when their durability runs out. They just break and stay in your inventory. If you want to use it again, you have to repair it at a castle shop, and the price ranges based on the quality of the weapon. I actually kind of like this system. It means you don't have to be afraid of using your special weapons, but you still have to be careful because they can be expensive to repair. You're not completely off the creek if they break, but you still have to think strategically, especially considering how gold is handled in this game. In other Fire Emblem games, gold's a universal resource. Everyone can take from the army's coffers and buy what they need. But in Genealogy, everyone just has their own personal spendings. Geez, Sigurd, what kind of boss are you? You couldn't spring for some petty cash? The only way characters can get more money is either by fighting in the arena at a castle, selling items, or saving a village before it gets completely destroyed. A thief can also steal money from enemies and give it to someone to help them out, but when a character gives someone cash, they just dump their entire purse on them. You can't give someone a small amount, you gotta fork it all over. The only other characters that could do this are the spouses of characters, so if one of them wants to go on a shopping spree, they could easily leave the other high and dry. That brings us to the last annoying thing about Genealogy, and that being that unless you're on a horse, you're probably SOL. Because the maps in Genealogy are so huge and take so long to traverse, mounted characters outshine everyone else by being able to get across them quickly and reach, defend, and attack objectives much easier. The good news is that a lot of characters in this game have horses either by default or through promotion. But the bad news is that the ones that don't can really get the short end of the stick. It's only made worse by the fact that mounted units can move again after they attack if they have movement left, so you can expect a lot of hit and runs from cavaliers on both sides. It's because of this that a common fan name for Genealogy is Mounted Emblem. Or at least it was until Awakening and Fates usurped that title. Albeit for much different reasons. So before I end this review, there's a particular chapter in this game that I really need to talk about. And I really need to talk about it because it's probably one of the most important moments in the entire Fire Emblem franchise. If you've never played this game before and you have any interest in it whatsoever, I highly recommend that you skip to this time code. Because if you're unspoiled for this, you're one of the few. Pretty much everybody in the Fire Emblem fandom knows about this part. But if you're one of those people, I highly recommend you don't listen to this next part. You've been warned. Now, if you've been paying attention, then you know there's a second generation of characters in Genealogy that are the children of the first generation. So with that, you're probably wondering what happened to Sigurd and his friends, and why don't you play as them the entire game? Well, there's actually a pretty good yet horrific reason for that. Sigurd's story is nothing but a tragedy. It starts bad and just gets worse from there. He receives a brief happiness by meeting the love of his life and then marrying her almost immediately after. As in the chapter after you meet her? Come on, guys. We all know that love at first sight is a terrible idea. Did none of you read Romeo and Juliet? Whoops. Another spoiler. After that, though, everything goes to hell and then just keeps going. Sigurd's manipulated by Arvis, the ruler of another kingdom, to wipe out all of his opposition so that he can rule the land as an emperor unopposed. In the process, Deirdre is also kidnapped sometime after giving birth to her first child, Seliph, and then whisked away and have all of memory of Sigurd wiped away, before being brought to Arvis, where she falls in love and marries him, who is also her half-brother. Yeah, I mentioned there was some incest in this game, and this is the big one. I'm not going to go too much into the specifics, but yeah, it's kind of messed up. The worst of all of this is laid out best in Chapter 5, the last chapter where you play Sigurd. Every single part of this chapter is a punch to the gut. Starts out with Sigurd having to save his father, who is fleeing the enemy, only for his father to die in his son's arms or dying on the way there. No matter what you do, Sigurd's father dies. And it only gets worse. After capturing the first castle, Sigurd's sister Ethla and her husband Quan, two characters that had previously been in your army and you probably got attached to, appear at the lower end of the map to come and back Sigurd up, all while carrying their newborn baby girl. So what happens? A group of dragon riders from Thracia chases them down and slaughters them all before kidnapping the baby princess. There is nothing you can do to prevent this. The riders spawn at the opposite end of the map on the other side of a desert, and just to rub salt in the wound, the game makes it so the dragon riders are unable to be targeted by your units during this phase because they are neutral enemies. Even if by some hacking attempt that you put a unit down there to help, they wouldn't be able to do squat. It's only made worse by the fact that Sigurd doesn't even get to see his sister before she dies. He only hears about her death secondhand at the next castle. Finally, when Sigurd and company reach the final castle, things start to actually look up. The mages of Veltham return on their allies and help Sigurd reach the castle, and from there he and his crew are brought before Arvis in what seems to be a celebration. Only for Arvis to turn around and say that Sigurd will now be branded a traitor and executed for his crimes against the kingdom. And just to kick out a whole bucket of salt into the wound, Arvis even brings out his new wife, Deirdre, to parade in front of Sigurd before burning him alive with fire magic. There is no happy ending for him. Sigurd is branded a traitor to his country, executed for treason, all while seeing the love of his life one last time, who does not only have no idea who he is, but is now married to another man, his executioner. This chapter is by far one of the most memorable and heart-wrenching chapters in all of Fire Emblem. Not just for what happens, but how it happens. The game sets it up time and time again as if there's some sort of shimmering hope. Rescuing Sigurd's father, Ethlin and Quan arriving, the mages helping you out, only for it to be torn away horribly every single time. It's not just the writing of this chapter that's so good, it's how it's laid out to hurt you through the gameplay as well. And when I kicked off that second generation with Seliph, I was raring to go. I was ready to avenge my father, unite the land, and topple an evil empire. And I actually wasn't all that angry at Arvis, to be honest. I mean, yeah, I want him dead for certain. But if I'm being real, Arvis is probably one of the best written villain characters in the series. Yeah, he's kind of a dick, but there's several scenes that show that Arvis doesn't want to be an emperor just for power. He wants to be an emperor to protect the world. He honestly thinks this is the best way to do it, and while he is being manipulated behind the scenes by an evil cult, he never strays from that ideal. You do end up killing him in the end, but by then he started to show regret for his actions all those years ago. Does it excuse all he did? No, of course not. The bastard needed to die. But even killing him felt bittersweet. I took no joy in it. And that's a pretty well written villain in my book. My biggest complaint is that Arvis didn't stay the main villain for the entire game. I mentioned that whole demon dragon cult from before, and it's here just like it is in most Fire Emblem games, but I really wish it wasn't. I really wish the endgame just would have been Seliph going up against Arvis, an emperor that had the best of intentions but clearly went too far. Genealogy often gets the reputation as being one of the best Fire Emblem games in the series. And honestly, I think it kind of deserves that title. I really liked this game. I had a really great experience with it. Not all of the experiences were good, but I feel like that has more to do with the time when this game was made rather than the game itself. Genealogy was a fresh Fire Emblem experience for me, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Sure, the game had some weird aspects to it that would later be changed in other games, but it managed to fit themes into its gameplay very effectively without being too annoying. It might be slightly less enjoyable on a completely blind playthrough since the game doesn't convey certain mechanics very well, but I wouldn't say that it brings the game down too much. Later games improved in almost every aspect that I criticized, so there is that. If you have any interest in this game, I highly recommend trying to play it in some way. Just trying to find a better English patch than I had, because for some reason it wasn't fully translated, so when we got to the epilogue, I have no idea what happens after I beat the final boss.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
I want you.
Catherine, that's disgusting. You're my sister.
Only by blood.
Oh, God! What is wrong with this family?